views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. On occasion, we've focused two episodes of Bronx Talk on an important local subject because we thought it deserved extra attention. Well, tonight's show is actually going to be the third edition of Bronx Talk that we dedicate to one subject within the last 5 weeks. And I can tell you, in our 20 years, we've never done that in such a short period of time. But this project, the Jerome Avenue Study, which gives us a chance to imagine what ought to be done with a 73-block area of the Bronx along Jerome Avenue between 165th and 184th Streets, is an important exercise that speaks to the past and the future of the Bronx and how we see it. Think about it. If you're given 73 blocks of the Bronx to reimagine, what would you want to see there, and how would you accomplish making it happen so the maximum number of people receive maximum benefit? It's a vital urban planning exercise for all of us to participate in. In the first edition of the Jerome Avenue Study on Bronx Talk, which we did at the beginning of March, we had the city on the show. The following week were community representatives, and tonight it's the two community boards who will be directly affected, specifically boards 4 and 5. Now, you can give us your opinion of what you'd like to see accomplished by the Jerome Avenue Study, and you can do that by calling in with questions or comments to 718-960-7241. You can also email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. But for the here and now, the district manager from Community Board 4, Jose Rodriguez. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And at no relation, the district manager of Community Board 5 is Xavier Rodriguez. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Gary.
All right.
Thank
So
you for
now I've
inviting us.
spoke with both of you before the show, and you tell me if I'm wrong. Xavier explained to me that it was really Community Board 5 many years ago that kind of conceptualized this idea. True? Not true? You would not dispute it? I don't know.
Well, I would say along the Jerome Avenue corridor, absolutely. But there's a portion of this neighborhood study that falls into Board 4.
No, I understand that. So is it true, though, that, and so let's go back to history. Tell me what you explained to me that way back when did this first come up?
Well, way back when, 2002, Pratt wanted to do a studio. They contacted our community board office. I said, absolutely. I had a relationship.
I mean, they wanted to build a studio?
No, they wanted to do a study with students.
Oh, with students, I see.
With students.
Okay.
And I said, absolutely, come on in. And we focused on several areas: Jerome Avenue, University, the waterfront, transportation system, etc.
Same kind of thing that we're talking
Same
about
kind of
now.
process. Mm-hmm. And then from there, in 2003, we embarked on a mission of trying to put together a 197A plan for our district. Mm-hmm. And we went about the whole planning process, and we developed a report, and we focused on 6 areas, and Jerome Avenue being one of them. Mm-hmm. We held our visioning sessions. We held 2 of them.
When was that?
Back in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And the process, as far as Ward 5 is concerned, was inclusive. We reached out to as many people as we could based on our ability. Mm-hmm. And in each session, we had over 150 people. I know that's not representative of several of 100,000 people plus, but
it's a start.
But it was a start. and they told us pointedly that they had some concerns about Jerome Avenue then.
Who told you?
The community.
Community said.
And
what were those concerns?
Those concerns first started out with quality of life concerns in terms of the types of businesses that were there, pedestrian clutter, in terms of the auto body shops had their cars parked on the sidewalks.
Right. Also, I'm guessing the usefulness to the community. Nothing wrong with auto body shops. Many of us who have cars use them. But if you have so many of them, you have a lot of space that people, it takes the place of a grocery store, for example.
Right. Illegally
And so what became of that process? And it seems to have stalled. I mean, it didn't go any further.
No, we completed our report, and then we forwarded it to our elected officials, locally as well as the borough, and we tried to continue the process. The 197A plan, it costs money. We ran out of resources.
And nobody picked up the ball.
And nobody picked up the ball.
Right. Now, as I understand it, Jose, I would call you Mr. Rodriguez, but we'll get confused with the two of you. As I understand it, Jose, this was kind of came to the fore because the mayor started to look at his housing plan and saying, well, where am I going to build new housing? How am I going to do this? And then this new study came about. Were you aware that Community Board 5 had done all this work, or was it just presented to you as kind of a new project?
No, absolutely. We were aware. Xavier and I, for some time, have had conversations regarding the Jerome Avenue corridor, and we actually made a concerted effort to include the Jerome Avenue corridor as part of our district needs statement, so that it was a cohesive effort on the part of Community Board 4 and 5 to sort of have the city look at, or city planning at this particular point in time, look at the corridor for development.
For you and your community board, what are the goals? What would you like to see happen on Jerome Avenue?
First and foremost, one of the things that we would like to see, and I think everyone agrees, and a lot of the community residents have been talking about it, is the preservation of affordable housing, the existing affordable housing that's there. We need to do all that we can to preserve the existing affordable housing. At the same time, we also need to create opportunities to have a diverse economic interest to come into the community. What I mean by interest, I mean other individuals, other families with a diverse economic spectrum, socioeconomic needs coming into the district.
I in a way I would put it off, but it kind of suggested in something Xavier said, and I'll get back to him about it. There is all this rancor out there that this is being done without input of the community. Now, Xavier said that the original studies, and I had people sitting where you're sitting who said to me they should come to the community first, although he's alleging that they did. Do you have a sense that what you are working on and the conversations you have are in sync or not in sync with what the people who live in Community Board 4 are thinking?
I believe it's in sync. I can only base my opinion and what I do based on the direction that my board takes me as the district manager. And the board is made up of community residents. The behest of the community. Absolutely, and the board is made up of community residents. And not only that, all our meetings are open to the public. And I've always said that individuals need to avail themselves and participate in the community board structure. That's the structure that has been laid out by the City of New York. And for some time now, it has been working. People do have some issues with the community boards and how they interact with the community. But I would say this, we, Board 4 and I believe Board 5, we've never shied away from or never kept anything from our community.
So at this point, are people saying anything to you or to the community board directly, or is there interaction?
I mean, folks are concerned about gentrification. Folks are concerned about displacement with respect to the residents in the buildings, and also displacement of possible business owners. So there is that concern, and we also share that concern. And what we're trying to say is that we have an opportunity, a prime opportunity, with an administration who has pledged that they are for the people, quote unquote.
Xavier, you believe that this has been a good interchange with the community, or right now do you feel like, gee whiz, this is kind of going along and I'd like to get more input from my community? Just characterize that, if you would.
I think the process that we're engaged right now with city planning has been one that has been open, and one that as a community board, we still have to be cautious, because at any point in time, the process may change, but as it exists right now, it is very open. They even suggested that they'd like the community boards to become stronger partners, which I've always advocated for, along with, saying to
Certainly,
Jose.
because then you could say some of the things. Do you find that the goals that Jose just talked about was housing, preserving existing housing, maybe developing new housing, creating an economic engine, and then thirdly, he certainly mentioned a concern about displacement of people and displacement of businesses. You find, you in sync with like 1, 2, and 3 in those goals?
I think primarily, yes. I mean, there are a few things that we probably Board 5 may be just a little bit different.
Such as?
We're looking to figure out how we can relocate the current business along Jerome Avenue.
Okay.
And
So that speaks to the economic or potential economic displacement.
From 2002 up until the water main break back a few years ago to present, what we find that most of these businesses, and listen, we applaud the entrepreneurial spirit, but most of these businesses that are currently there now, as we know it, are month to month. They primarily pay for the existing property owners' property taxes.
Right.
And the few property owners who do have businesses there are usually by and large garages.
So how do you see that playing out? In other words, a plan comes out. Now, just two, experiences that we have. One is a little while in the past that we had in the Bronx with the Bronx Terminal Market. And then most recently, what we're hearing about Willets Point is that all those businesses are going to be relocated to the Bronx. That's another story. But those are two examples of these kinds of projects. Do you see a similar thing, or is there a way to understand how this might work?
Well,
What would you like to see?
I think in terms of understanding it, that's a process within itself. But as for Willets Point and other auto-related businesses that got relocated to the Bronx, to the Hunts Point, we see the similar type of situation.
That you could find relocation for some of these businesses.
And whatever support that they need in that relocation process, they should be given. Because I don't think that you can transform the Jerome Avenue corridor with the existing businesses in place. And that's the belief of the community board.
And it sounded like from what you said originally, that was one of the concerns, that you were going to have to deal with the nature of businesses there. And I'm going to say editorially, gee whiz, if we're going to move auto businesses, let's move them to Queens, since they gave us the gift of all those auto businesses. But that's just me being me. But did you want to weigh in on that idea of displacement and how we're going to, I use the word imagine, how we're going to imagine what should happen over here?
Listen, by no means this process is going to be easy, especially with displacing these businesses. But something has to be done in that area. Far too long, the quality of life within that area, that Jerome Avenue corridor, has just not improved for many, many years. And so now we have an opportunity to change the quality of life, to change the socioeconomic conditions of this particular neighborhood. And I think we have an opportunity now to do it right and to
do it right. You believe we could do this right?
I believe we can do it right, and I believe that we can learn from the mistakes, allow me to use that word, that was done in Manhattan, Harlem, Washington Heights, Inwood, and obviously Brooklyn.
I love hearing this because, my sense is from the people I talk to in the Bronx, from the people who came on the show, is that they are guided and they are concerned because they have lived with these, what you called mistakes, for years. That people were abused, people were displaced, people moved out. You think we could do it and minimize that to some degree?
I believe so.
Wow.
I truly believe it. Listen, for many years we fought about receiving our fair share. Now we're talking about entertaining a rebirth of our neighborhood. And it behooves us to have that conversation and sit down with all the parties, all stakeholders involved, to get their own input and create some type of plan that everyone could agree to.
How do we do, I have some specifics about, some of the things might be there, but you brought up, how to improve people's socioeconomic status. How do we do that?
I think one of the things you do is you bring in the proper services. First and foremost, because of the high unemployment rate and things of that nature, the educational system in that neighborhood has declined. Test performance have year in, year out have failed to meet the mark. And I think in order to do that, one has to bring in an influx of individuals who either once lived in the community but are priced out because, well, they're not making the $1 million a year.
Right.
For example, I always use this example, district manager, right? Wouldn't you want someone like myself, someone like Xavier? Wouldn't you want more professional individuals like teachers and some of the firemen and police officers coming back to the area?
Let me pass that over to Xavier. So what do we need to do in the Jerome Avenue study and ultimately what comes out in Jerome Avenue to achieve that dream? It's a fascinating dialogue. I had this dialogue on this show with the borough president recently.
Well, I can go back to the late 60s, 70s. We can do the transformation in terms of the brick and mortar, but it's always been a hard task in terms of bringing about that transformation in terms of the human capital. And you can give someone a nice apartment, but you've got to be able to figure out how do you get that person a job. And a job where they can sustain themselves and their families and beat back that old argument, any job is better
than no job.
Yeah.
So, to me, and I think of, I grew up in the Bronx in a stable, relatively stable community. And what were the elements that were in that community? I'm not going to ask you this. I'm going to tell you. We had after-school centers. We had our parents were involved in adult centers in the evening, and there was a sense of community. Now with the fragmentation of so many people coming from other places, and we've kind of lost that. Can we capture a community here? Can we create a community here?
That's the only way it's going to, the rebirth, that's the only way that you can have a community with all of the elements that you described. I think that foremost, I want to go back to something that Jose said. In order to transform a community, you've got to be able to start getting the city to commit. It's just not about the housing.
Your friend over there is giving you the thumbs up, so let's get into that. Go ahead.
Because, look, when you're talking about I think I heard something like $40 billion total in this 10-year housing plan, 8 plus billion from the city side and 30 billion that the private sector has to raise. The win-win is already for the real estate interest, and yes, there'll be some affordable housing built, but that does not transform a community. We've had the South Bronx plan, we've had model cities.
But this is why, and I'm going to speak for people I hear from all the time, this is why they're concerned, because they say every time this happens, somebody else's interest takes the place of our interest. So what you're saying is the city has to really step up and represent not only the business community and the commercial interest, but the people in the community.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And why did you give us the thumbs up when he said
Because I totally agree. I mean, that's the only way that you're going to enhance a community and bring up the socioeconomic conditions.
Is your sense that the city is ready to do that?
I think so.
They are.
I think so.
In this case.
You have to see the process that city planning has put about involving multiple agencies. I mean, I've been involved in city government in this dialogue, and I've been involved in city government for a short period of time. Xavier and others, they've been involved, for some time now, and they can say to you, this is a different model. This is a bottom-up approach. It's not perfect, by no means.
But this is, you're alleging, and this is a fundamental question. I'm going to ask you something which I actually asked you both before we came on the air. This is a fundamental question because people in the community have heard this before, and all the neighborhoods of the Bronx have seen this before. Carol Sammel from Department of Planning was on the show and said, we're doing this from the bottom up, and you're saying it's true. You
Absolutely
believe
it is.
When I asked people from the community who here, does the community board, because basically I was saying that the city is communicating to them through the community board.
Yes.
Does the community board represent their interests? They said no. And I said, well, I mean, it's a matter of record, it's on tape. I said, well, then we have a real big problem. You believe that I'm assuming you both believe that your community boards are really going to listen to what the community wants.
Absolutely.
So
But I also would like to put, not a challenge, but put something out there that you must avail yourself. We have meetings monthly. They're open to the public. Our doors are open.
And you don't get big attendance.
If you do not come and receive the information that we're providing, then I don't know what else besides standing on a street corner with a bullhorn on top of a car.
Which can be effective,
Which
folks.
can be effective, but beyond
about
doing that, I just don't know how we get this information out. And we've done the flyering, we've done the email blast, but time in and time out, and God bless these individuals who care for their community because they're part of our community, and I rely on them because they provide information to us. But again, if you do not avail yourself, come to our general board meeting, come to our community our committee meetings. That's where the information is.
Here's a piece of information that came out, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but basically they were saying that if you bring in all these people to this area, and in fact, Carol Sammel said it when she was on the show, and she's the director of the Bronx Department of City Planning, and she said the transportation infrastructure is there, and then a lot of people said, you know what? The number 4 train is monstrously crowded, and you don't want to be, trying to fight your way in. And now you're talking about bringing more people to live in the neighborhood. You're talking about bringing professionals. There's no infrastructure. Is transportation something that needs to be looked at, or is it something you're assuming is just going to be fine?
Well, absolutely. I think, in any project that you're planning, you have to look at the rapid transit and the surface transit system. And if it needs improvement, people need to step forward and weigh in and suggest what those improvements need to be. I'll just speak about Community Board 5. Right now, Burnside train station, one of the most important in the Bronx, could use a escalator for those who are physically challenged.
It is hard to believe, and how many times have I taken the number 4 train? It is absolutely hard to believe that station doesn't have that kind of amenity, especially given the nature of the population there. And otherwise, to me, that's the kind of dialogue that absolutely has to happen if we're talking about building.
And by the way, Gary, I mean, we participated in a Jerome Avenue traffic study. Along with Community Board 4. We're awaiting now for DOT and also Bronx City Planning to weigh in to share with the community at large in terms of some of the recommendations and in terms of what needs to be done in terms of transportation.
So the information is out there.
It's there.
And this goes back to what you said. So the city's got to pony up and have our representatives and everybody else say, okay, we're going to do this, but if we're going to do it and do it right, we've got to take care of these kinds of issues.
And I don't mind having the community activists yelling and screaming that they want a fair process. But to say that community boards are not representative of the things that they care about, I think it's inaccurate.
Yes.
I have not seen them come to the community boards and participate within the process.
So what you're suggesting is they don't even know what the dialogue is, and maybe there are people standing up for their interests that they're not even aware of.
And to give you an example, as soon as they let us know that they would like to meet with us, I offered myself. I sat down with their leadership, shared with them in terms of how we've gotten into the process early on in terms of Jerome Avenue, and we welcomed them to come make their presentations to the board, participate in our communities, and even if they want to run as a second track in terms of having their own visioning sessions within our community, we welcome it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've done the same.
let's as we start to wrap up, let's just talk about the process from here on. Now, it was said that, by the end of, just go the calendar year, by the end of this calendar year, the end of 2015, there would be some general plan presented. Number one, is that true? And number two, how do we get there at this point where we're just having dialogue about this thing to a point where all of the issues, housing, the notion of displacement, what are you doing with the commercial entities, how are you going to deal with that, how are you going to deal with infrastructure, getting developers online? I mean, this is a very big process. How do you see that playing out?
As it's been going on, the city planning has laid out a plan. First and foremost, what they did was they met with us and they said, listen, you guys understand your community. Who are the stakeholders? So we provided a list of stakeholders. Some of those stakeholders are activists within the groups.
Individuals and some of the groups as well.
Yes. And we invited them, and they were part of the discussion. And that model, the stakeholder meeting model, was for us to articulate to city planning and the city what our needs are and how we would like this visioning study, this neighborhood study to be. And I think something got lost in translation there, and some folks went one way and some folks went another way.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that this dialogue that we're having on this show is going to help bridge this gap, because I want to see this thing work. I got to tell you.
So do I. I mean, look, the 3 open houses that we've had so far.
We're just about out of time, so wrap it up.
Quickly, the 3 open houses, as far as I'm concerned, have been a success. They started out in Board 4 in the Bronx Museum. We then came to Community Board 5 at the Davidson Community Center.
Are you waiting to hear from the city at this point for the next step?
Well, they've already told us. The next step is a series of community workshops starting in May, and then the visioning sessions.
And those will be publicized?
Publicized.
Well, they're yelling at me to wrap it up. I'm sorry. So the phone numbers and the info for Community Board 4 and 5, they're going to put on the screen while I talk. Xavier Rodriguez, Jose Rodriguez, no relation. But they are friends. We do appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
And I hope this continues to be a forum for discussion on what I think is a vital topic, and I hope we get it right, because everybody should benefit. That's it. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. Put them on our Facebook page. Read them on the air during a future edition of our program, or I'll even send the questions out to my buddies over here, and you'll get some answers if you'd like. You can check out our archives on our Facebook page. You can also see BronxNet.org, where all our archives are there. Next week, we look at the recently passed state budget with a Bronx Assemblyman and a Bronx State Senator to review education, ethics, housing, the particulars of the budget. Waving at me to say goodbye. Goodbye. See you next week.